Have you ever walked into a room and felt the temperature shift not from the air, but from the eyes watching you? You smiled, they didn't. No words spoken, but the chill was real. Why do some people dislike you without ever knowing you? You ask yourself, did I do something wrong? You retrace your steps. You play the interaction back like a loop, and nothing makes sense. But that silence you felt, it was real. That tension also real. This video isn't about blame, it's about understanding. Why do people without reason, without words, sometimes carry hate for someone who's done nothing to them? The Stoics, ancient thinkers like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, believed that most human suffering begins when we try to control what isn't ours to control. And other people's opinions are not ours. But what if understanding those silent reactions isn't about fixing them? What if it's about freeing yourself from their weight? Let's begin there. The truth is, people don't always dislike you for what you do. They often dislike you for who you appear to be, for what you reflect back to them. Maybe you remind them of something they haven't resolved. Maybe you make them feel inadequate without saying a single word. There's a strange discomfort that happens when you walk through life being yourself, especially if that self is calm, grounded, and unbothered. Because peace is intimidating to those at war within. That's when you start to notice something. Not overt conflict, but subtle resistance. The short answers. The averted eyes, the passive-aggressive jokes. It's not always loud, but it's there. We live in a world that tells you, be kind and you'll be loved. Be helpful and you'll be accepted. But what they don't tell you is this: some people will reject you simply because you didn't play small. You didn't shrink to make them feel tall. You didn't nod when they expected silence. You didn't ask for permission to be whole, and so they resent you. Not because you wronged them, but because your presence exposed something in them they don't want to confront. Insecurity, jealousy, fear. And the moment you realize that their feelings are not your fault, you reclaim your freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. Not out of cynicism, but out of preparation." He wasn't giving us permission to hate back. He was showing us how not to be surprised by human nature. Think of a mirror, not the one you see your face in, but the kind people see themselves in when they see you. If someone's been hiding from their own truth and you walk in fully owning yours, they won't always celebrate it. Sometimes they'll hate it because you remind them of what they abandoned, of the courage they didn't choose, of the calm they never developed. It's not personal, but it feels personal. And the danger lies in internalizing it, in believing that you must be the problem, that you should dim your light or apologize for your confidence or explain away your peace. But Stoicism says this: you are not responsible for another person's interpretation of your existence. You're only responsible for your character, your choices, and how calmly you carry both. So what do you do when you sense that chill? You don't react, you reflect. You don't match their coldness, you stay warm. And above all, you remind yourself, I am not what they project onto me. I am what I choose to be, even in the face of their silence. Because often it's not hate, it's pain unspoken, it's confusion misdirected, and in many cases it's admiration, twisted by insecurity. The Stoics weren't soft. They faced betrayal, exile, injustice, and still believed in inner peace. So when people hate you without cause, don't go chasing their approval. Stand still and let your calm speak louder than their chaos. But calm isn't just about silence. It's also about insight. To understand why people act the way they do, we need to look deeper, beyond their silence, into the emotions they may never admit. Let's explore that mirror more closely next, where we begin with one of the deepest roots of hidden resentment: envy. Have you ever noticed how simply being yourself seems to make some people uncomfortable? You're not being loud. You're not showing off. You're not even trying to stand out. And yet something about your presence creates tension. The room shifts. The energy changes. Someone's smile fades or their friendliness turns mechanical. It doesn't make sense at first, but over time the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Some people don't dislike you for what you do. They dislike you for what you reflect. This is where we begin to understand one of the most common and misunderstood causes of hidden resentment: projection. Projection happens when a person feels an uncomfortable emotion they can't face, and instead of dealing with it, they push it outward. They assign it to someone else. They cast a shadow onto a face that was never the problem. You might be accused of arrogance when in reality you were just confident. You might be labeled selfish when in truth you were setting boundaries. You might be told you're intimidating when all you did was carry yourself with quiet composure. Why? Because your calm challenges their chaos. Your steadiness unsettles their storm, and your self-assurance stirs up their self-doubt. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus once said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but the opinions we form about them." Most of the time, people don't see you as you are. They see you as they are, filtered through layers of pain, fear, and comparison. This filter distorts everything. To someone insecure, your confidence might feel like an attack. To someone ashamed, your authenticity feels like a threat. To someone who feels unseen, your visibility feels unfair. And none of it is truly about you. Think of projection like standing in front of a warped mirror. The reflection isn't accurate. It's stretched, twisted, reshaped by someone else's history. But if you believe what you see in their eyes, you'll start to shrink. You'll question your worth. You'll begin to perform for approval that will never come. Let's look at how envy works in this dynamic. Unlike jealousy, which simply says, "I want what you have," envy says something darker. It says you shouldn't have what you have. It should belong to someone else, maybe me. Envy is one of the most dangerous and silent forms of hostility. It doesn't always wear a mask of anger. Sometimes it comes dressed in politeness, in silence, in distance. But it grows in the dark. There's a subtle kind of envy that's hard to spot, the kind that isn't loud or cruel but corrosive. A friend who stops celebrating your wins. A colleague who keeps saying, "You're lucky," but never sees the work you've done. A relative who keeps changing the subject when your name is mentioned. What's happening here isn't hatred, it's grief. Not grief for something they lost, but for something they feel they never had. And when someone hasn't healed their grief, your success feels like salt in a wound. There's a story of a young man named Ray, a quiet guy who worked hard, stayed humble, and slowly built a reputation in his field. He didn't network aggressively. He didn't talk himself up. He simply did the work consistently, silently, skillfully. Over time, his reputation began to grow. And with it, the whispers started. He's only where he is because of luck. He must be doing something behind the scenes. He's not even that impressive. These words didn't come from strangers. They came from people who knew him, people who had seen his work ethic, people who smiled to his face and questioned his worth behind his back. Ray hadn't changed, but their perception of him had, because his progress reminded them of their own lack of progress. His growth exposed the places they had stood still. The Stoics would say this is not Ray's burden to carry. You cannot take responsibility for someone else's reaction to your light. You can only control how gently you shine. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." You don't need to clap back. You don't need to shrink. You don't need to chase explanation. You need to stay grounded, anchored in character and principle and peace. And you need to remember something essential. If someone misunderstands you because of their own insecurity, that's their internal story, not your truth. Of course, this doesn't mean we should become cold or dismissive. Compassion matters. Sometimes someone's bitterness is a quiet cry for help. Sometimes their envy is a mirror of deep pain. But compassion without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. And Stoicism doesn't ask us to tolerate everything. It asks us to see clearly, without judgment, without illusion. The next time you feel that strange tension, that distance, you didn't create pause. Not to fix it, but to recognize what it is. A signal, a reflection, a sign that what you're carrying, your calm, your confidence, your clarity is powerful enough to stir what lies buried in others. And that's okay. You're not here to be safe for everyone. You're here to be real. And realness by its very nature will provoke people who are hiding. The question is, will you keep showing up as yourself or shrink to fit the comfort of others? The Stoics would say, choose the self you respect in solitude. Because the peace you cultivate in your own soul is worth more than the approval of a world still at war with itself. Now we've explored the inward roots of resentment, envy, projection, insecurity. But what happens when the cause isn't emotional? What happens when people grow distant because of something far simpler? A word misplaced, a tone misread, a message misunderstood. Let's explore that next. Not every conflict is born from envy. Not every cold glance is rooted in insecurity. Sometimes the reason someone seems to dislike you is far simpler. It comes down to something you said or didn't say. Something you meant one way but was taken another. A moment of silence they read as judgment. A casual remark they replayed for hours. A tone you used while tired misheard as arrogance. In the realm of human relationships, words are not enough, because it's not just what you say, it's how it's received. And between every message we give and every meaning someone else hears, there is a vast space, full of noise, fear, and assumption. That's where misunderstanding lives. And from there, resentment often grows. Let's slow this down. Imagine this: you send someone a short reply to a long message. You were busy, you meant no harm. But to them it felt like disinterest, dismissal, disrespect. You didn't intend to hurt, but intention doesn't always matter when emotion enters the room. That's the curse of modern communication. We type quickly, we skim faster, we respond late, and all of it is open to interpretation. Now imagine they don't tell you what they felt. They just start pulling away. And over time, that one moment becomes a story. He doesn't care. She's always cold. They never really liked me. Suddenly, you're cast in a role you never auditioned for, and you have no idea what happened. Here's the deeper truth. Most people don't hate you. They hate the version of you they created in their minds. And that version, it's stitched together with fragments, a gesture here, a word there, a silence stretched too far. In this way, many human conflicts are built not on facts, but on incomplete perceptions. That's why Epictetus said we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Because when we truly listen without the noise of our own assumptions, we hear something more honest than words. We hear intent. But how often do we stop and seek clarity? How often do we ask, did you mean it that way? Could we have misunderstood each other? Can we talk about this before we assume the worst? We don't, because assumption is quicker than understanding, and the world moves fast. So instead of pausing, we judge. Instead of asking, we react. Instead of clarifying, we close off. Let me tell you about James. He was part of a small team at work, quiet, focused, always respectful. He didn't join every group lunch. He didn't stay long at happy hours. Not because he disliked people, he just needed time to recharge. But over time, the story started to circulate. He's arrogant. He thinks he's better than us. He doesn't want to be part of the team. No one ever asked him directly, they just assumed. And James, unaware of the story being told, noticed the shift: colder greetings, fewer invitations, subtle distance. One day a colleague finally mentioned it. "You're hard to talk to." James paused. "Did I do something that made you feel dismissed?" he asked softly. They were surprised, because no one had expected him to care. But he did. And in that quiet conversation, misunderstanding melted. The room thawed. It didn't fix everything, but it created a bridge. One that had been missing for months, built not with an apology, but with presence. Here's what the Stoics teach us about this. You are only responsible for your side of the bridge. Your clarity, your kindness, your consistency. You cannot control how others interpret your tone. You cannot rewrite the stories they tell in your absence. But you can lead with intention. You can listen when something feels off. You can clarify without defensiveness. And most importantly, you can choose peace over pride. But what if the misunderstanding is too deep? What if someone has already made up their mind about you? Then the Stoic path is even clearer. You stay calm, you stay kind, you stay free. Because as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. You don't chase every misunderstanding. You don't beg to be liked. You don't over-explain. You remain centered in your values. You speak truth gently, and you let time reveal character. Still, it hurts being misunderstood, especially when your intentions were good. Especially when the story someone tells about you is so far from who you are. But this pain too can be a teacher. It teaches patience. It teaches humility. And it teaches detachment from the illusion of full control. Seneca once wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." In relationships, we crave understanding. We crave resolution. We crave to be seen for who we are. But sometimes you won't get that. And that's when you practice the hardest lesson of all, to let go without bitterness. Misunderstanding is inevitable, but hostility isn't. If we carry ourselves with clarity, if we speak with gentleness, if we act with intention, then what they choose to believe no longer defines who we are. We return to our center, we protect our peace, and we walk through the noise with soft steps and an open heart. Next, we'll explore another reason why people distance themselves or turn hostile, one that hides in plain sight. Not miscommunication, not envy, but difference, different values, different beliefs, different ways of seeing the world, and how in the absence of tolerance, those differences become walls. Let's explore that in next part, The Unseen Hand. Social conditioning, values, and hidden beliefs. Not every fracture between people is born from action. Sometimes the wound is philosophical. Sometimes it's a quiet disagreement about how the world should be. You may never talk politics. You may never argue religion. You may not even bring up your beliefs. But the way you live, the way you walk, speak, or choose can silently oppose someone else's deeply held values. And without a word exchange, resentment begins. It's subtle, it's unspoken, but it runs deep. This is what happens when values collide. Every human being carries an internal framework, a belief system shaped by family culture, religion, trauma, and time. We like to think we're rational, but we're not. We're patterned, and those patterns run deep. So when someone lives outside those patterns, when someone challenges the normal we've accepted, the reaction isn't always curiosity. Often it's defensiveness, sometimes even fear. And that fear, it turns into judgment. That judgment becomes coldness. And coldness becomes quiet hatred. All because someone else chose differently. Imagine you live in a community where stability is sacred. Get a secure job, start a family, retire quietly. Now imagine someone in that community drops everything to travel the world. They live minimally. They value experience over possessions. They don't follow the path. What do people say? They're lost. They're selfish. They're irresponsible. But what if they're not? What if they're just free? And that freedom terrifies the ones still in cages. This is how social conditioning works. It tells us here's the way things should be. Then it praises those who conform and punishes those who don't. The punishment isn't always loud. It's not always violence. Sometimes it's silence, exclusion, dismissal. You feel it when someone smiles less around you, when they don't invite you anymore, when they politely tolerate your presence but never really hear you. That's the punishment for being different. And you didn't even say anything. You just live differently. Epictetus wrote, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." But when you embody something too far from someone else's philosophy, it can feel like a challenge to their identity. If they were raised to believe life must follow a script, your improvisation feels like chaos. If they were told love looks a certain way, your freedom feels like betrayal. If they cling to safety, your courage feels like recklessness. And in their discomfort, they may lash out, not to hurt you, but to protect what they think is right. The Stoics understood that we all walk through life carrying invisible beliefs, some inherited, some chosen, and very few question. That's why they encouraged awareness to know not just what we believe, but why. Marcus Aurelius warned against blind judgment, saying, "Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I'm about to criticize? When you find yourself disliked for no clear reason, consider that you may simply be standing in contrast to someone else's beliefs. Not wrong, just different. And for some, that difference is unbearable." There's a story about a man named Theo. Theo lived simply. He didn't chase promotions. He spent time with his children. He read often. He walked slowly. People at work thought he lacked ambition. Family said he was underachieving. But Theo didn't see life the way they did. He didn't believe success meant speed. He didn't think wealth equaled worth. He wasn't loud about it. He didn't preach. But his choices reflected something, and that reflection unsettled those who chose differently. They began to criticize. They made jokes. They excluded him. Why? Because his existence felt like a contradiction. They couldn't understand him, so they judged him. But Theo stayed still. He knew their discomfort wasn't his burden. When values clash, judgment follows. But judgment is a mirror, not of you, but of the one looking at you. And the Stoic response is not to argue, not to prove, but to live. Live quietly, live kindly, live truthfully, and let your life speak for itself. We are not responsible for how others interpret our differences. We are only responsible for how we carry them, with grace, with calm, and with compassion. Because the people who judge most harshly, they are often the most afraid of being wrong, afraid of change, afraid that their way isn't the only way. And fear unspoken becomes resentment. That's why inner peace will always be misunderstood by those at war within. So what can we do when someone dislikes us for how we live? We let them. We do not bend. We do not harden. We do not shrink. We walk with quiet confidence, knowing that our values are not weapons. They are our compass. Let others follow theirs. We'll follow ours. And if the path diverges, let it. Not every soul is meant to walk beside you. But there's another reason people may turn cold. It has nothing to do with beliefs, nothing to do with misunderstanding, and not even envy. It's more primitive, more destructive. It's the ancient feeling of rivalry. Not just competition, but a deep, gnawing obsession with being better. Let's dive into that next. Sometimes dislike doesn't come from misunderstanding. It doesn't even come from disagreement. It comes from proximity too close for comfort. You didn't provoke it. You didn't boast. You just kept moving. And that movement alone made someone uncomfortable. Because in a world obsessed with comparison, your progress can feel like someone else's failure. Competition has a strange way of twisting admiration into resentment. At first they admire you, then they try to keep up with you, and finally they wish you'd slow down or trip just so they can feel okay again. It's not about you, it's about the mirror you hold up without meaning to. When your life reflects what someone else feels they lack, the tension begins. They start watching closely, measuring, comparing. And in that comparison, they stop seeing your effort. They only see what they think they're missing. Seneca once said, "It is the mind that makes us rich or poor." But many are too caught in their scarcity to realize this. To them, your gain feels like their loss. Your shine dims their spotlight. Your presence becomes a problem they can't name. That's when quiet rivalry is born. No insults, no confrontations, just coldness, distance, passive remarks, a subtle energy shift that tells you they're not rooting for you anymore. It can happen anywhere at work, in families, even in close friendships, especially there. The most painful rivalries are not with strangers. They're with people who once clapped for us and suddenly stopped. Let's talk about Max and Elias. Max and Elias were childhood friends. They both worked hard, but in different ways. Max was louder, he talked about his goals, shared updates often. Elias was quiet. He built in silence, celebrated in private. Years passed. Elias's quiet work began to bear fruit. He wasn't flashy, but his stability became visible. His peace was steady, his progress real. At first, Max clapped, but then he stopped. The claps became awkward silence. The praise turned to comparison. The friendship dimmed. Elias hadn't changed. He hadn't gloated. He hadn't made it a race. But Max's identity was built on being ahead. And when Elias caught up without noise, Max felt exposed. This is how rivalries often start, not with conflict, but with quiet comparison and the painful feeling of being left behind. The Stoics would tell us, don't tie your self-worth to anyone else's path. Marcus Aurelius warned ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. And that's exactly what rivalry is, a trap of constant measuring, constant performing. In that mindset, no one wins. Because even if you stay ahead, you're always looking over your shoulder. What we must realize is this: real growth isn't about being better than someone. It's about being better than yesterday's version of yourself. The Stoic path isn't competitive. It's inward, it's slow, it's silent. And sometimes that silence becomes threatening, especially to those who seek validation through performance, to those who haven't found peace without applause, to those who rely on being the best to feel okay. When you show up without needing to prove, you unsettle those who do. And sometimes that alone is enough for dislike to brew. So what do we do when we sense rivalry forming? We don't fight it. We don't shrink. We don't retaliate. We keep walking. We wish them well quietly. And we withdraw if needed without bitterness. Because trying to prove yourself to someone stuck in comparison is like trying to calm a storm by shouting at the wind. It only fuels the chaos. There's a better way. You stay in your lane. You focus on mastery, not applause. And you remember that peace never competes. People will always measure. That's not your concern. Your only task is to live with integrity. Some will be inspired. Others will feel threatened. Let both responses pass through you. Neither define who you are. There's a final trap here we must avoid. It's subtle but deadly, internalizing the rivalry. You start questioning yourself. You think maybe you are too much. Maybe you should downplay your success. Maybe you should dim your light. Don't. Dimness never healed jealousy, and shrinking never built peace. Your calm, your confidence, your quiet strength, these are not provocations. They're proof of your journey, and you owe no one an apology for that. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. The Stoic doesn't engage in ego games. He lets time speak. He lets character reveal itself. And he keeps moving forward with grace, with stillness, with no need to race. Rivalry fades when you stop playing. Let others compete. Let them chase. You master. You build. You remain grounded. Next, we enter the final truth. Sometimes people dislike you not for what you do, not for who you are, but for simply refusing to conform. You broke an unspoken rule. You chose authenticity over expectation. And in a world that prefers obedience, that choice can make you a target. Let's explore that now in the final part. Unwritten rules. The price of being yourself in a world that prefers copies. There's a quiet rule that governs many lives, unwritten, unspoken, but heavily enforced. Be like the rest. Don't stand out too much. Don't think differently. Don't live too freely. And if you do, there will be consequences. People may not tell you, but you'll feel it. It shows up in glances that linger too long, in silence after you speak your truth, in the way your presence becomes a problem simply because you stop pretending. We live in a world that praises authenticity but often punishes those who fully embrace it. Because real authenticity disrupts the flow. It reveals how many are simply conforming, and nothing unsettles the crowd like someone who refuses to perform. Have you ever made a choice that felt true to you and suddenly noticed people pulling away? You weren't rude. You weren't dramatic. You were just honest. Maybe you left a job that drained you. Maybe you ended a relationship that no longer aligned. Maybe you chose a lifestyle that made more sense to your soul. And people didn't say it out loud, but the energy changed. That's the price of being yourself. Not because you did something wrong, but because your freedom made others question their own cage. The Stoics would not be surprised. Epictetus said, if you wish to be free, then you must be willing to be thought foolish and ridiculous. Because when you stop following the script, you make others uncomfortable. You show them what it looks like to live intentionally. And that reflection is painful for those who haven't made the same choice. So instead of facing their discomfort, they project it. They label you selfish, weird, arrogant, difficult, naive, delusional. These are not truths, they're defenses. Ways to protect the status quo from the challenge your authenticity presents. Let's take Lila's story. She worked in corporate finance for 10 years, made good money, had security, wore the uniform, played the part, but she was empty. So she left. She became a nature guide, traded skyscrapers for forests, lost half her income, and gained her soul back. Her peace was real, her energy changed, and her friends did too. Some stopped calling, some made subtle jokes, some smiled but with eyes that said, I don't get it. Why? Because Lila didn't just make a new choice, she revealed what was possible. And when someone shows you there's another way, you're forced to ask, why haven't I taken it? That's what people resist. Not you, but the mirror you've become. When you live truthfully, you threaten those who rely on imitation. Not because you're wrong, but because you remind them of everything they've silenced in themselves. Their dreams, their doubts, their unexplored paths. So how do they respond? Sometimes with distance, sometimes with judgment, sometimes with subtle, persistent rejection. But beneath all of it is the same fear. What if I've been pretending too long? The Stoic answer is not to argue, not to convince, but to stay centered. To know that your worth doesn't depend on consensus. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the approval of others, it's a social instinct, but unnecessary. You weren't made to be accepted by everyone. You were made to live aligned. And that alignment will cost you. It will cost popularity. It will cost ease. Sometimes it will cost connection. But what it gives you is something rare. Peace, integrity, a life that actually belongs to you. Still, it hurts being pushed away for simply being yourself. You want to be understood. You want to be welcomed. That's natural. But you must ask, would you rather be accepted for your performance or respected for your truth? One is conditional, the other is real. And the Stoic walks toward what is real, even if the path is quieter, lonelier, slower. Because truth doesn't rush, and meaning never depends on mass approval, here's what you need to remember. Some people will dislike you simply because you stop shrinking. You stop playing small. You stopped agreeing to roles that suffocated your spirit. And that choice, though beautiful, is often met with quiet resistance. Let it come. Don't chase validation. Don't compromise to stay in the room. Don't fold your soul to fit into boxes built by other people's fear. You're not here to be easily understood. You're here to be whole. As we come to the end of this reflection, remember this. The reasons people secretly hate you often say far more about them than they ever will about you. Their envy rooted in their own longing. Their judgments, reflections of their own constraints. Their silence, a mirror of their own discomfort. You don't need to defend yourself from every shadow. You just need to walk in your light. With grace, with steadiness, with a deep knowing that being disliked is not a failure, it's often a byproduct of being real. And the Stoic lives not for approval, but for alignment. So go gently, be kind where you can. Be clear when you must, but above all, be true. Because in the end, the goal is not to be liked by everyone. It's to like the life you are building, and to sleep each night knowing you remain yourself in a world that asked you to be everything else. If this reflection brought clarity or comfort, I invite you to stay a little longer on this path with us. Like this video if it resonated. Subscribe if you seek more calm in a noisy world. And let me know in the comments which part of this journey spoke to you most deeply. We're building something here, not just videos, but a quiet space to think, to feel, to grow. Until next time, walk slow, live true, and keep your peace.